You're listening to www.integralnaked.org.
The fear of approach question, because I've been chewing on it through all these other commentaries, and the issue of who would I be afraid to approach was not the right question. I would fear being rejected by the more powerful woman, successful woman, but I would find it infinitely more attractive because my mate is taken care of. I have that part of my life dealt with. I don't approach women for sex in 2004. I'm much more interested in who is interesting, who's powerful, who could be an interesting contributor to my intellectual or spiritual development, who's better from a business perspective, networking, what have you. And yet we still have that detritus of the sex game going on, and that's hard in business when you've got the sex things going on at the same time as, and I feel very blessed to be in a monogamous relationship because it does take care of that question, but I don't think that's true of everybody. And I think the dynamics of male-female relationships, when you're mixing the two, are fairly difficult.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more here, and if you thought you were disagreeing with me,
no, I just was provoked.
We're going to have to come back to agreement here, because the single male who is interested, from his perspective, rejection will occur if there isn't a feeling of her responding, and then that response doesn't become whatever it could become. And so the single male, which would like to include ultimately sex, love, and marriage down the road, approaching the other single female who is successful, he fears being rejected by her to a greater degree. And even to some degree, in a business situation, we would fear being rejected more by Meg Christensen than somebody who everything else was like Meg Christensen, but she was a homemaker that we would approach at the party. But there's something else you said that was so important here.
How do you do male-female in 2004 where sex isn't the issue, or at least not the primary one?
Wait till 2005.
Then you'll have the answer?
You might have the answer.
If you can wait until 2005, then you know sex isn't the issue.
I'm saying that,
right?
see, even the humor here, if I may underscore a point, even the humor, there's a giggle factor about this question that makes it a very alive and poignant one for me.
Yeah, the woman who is more successful is definitely of greater amount of interest to the man. And that's what I said before, that we're attracted more to that successful, vibrant, out there, effective, high sense of efficacy woman. But we are also fearful that she's more likely to reject us. And in fact, here's another important part of that. When women say men aren't attracted to successful women, that doesn't compute, because men are more fearful of being rejected by successful women. We aren't fearful about being rejected by someone that we're not attracted to. So the very fact that we are fearful of being rejected by successful women is an indicator that we are attracted to the successful woman, just like you were talking about, sex or not. Now, if sex is involved in the process, then the fear becomes much greater, because we know we have a chance of being rejected through more stages. We know that she's going to be looking for a provider long term, and especially if we would like to take it all the way to marriage, and she will reject us to a much greater degree, that somewhere along the line, that if we are not as successful as she is, that she will reject us. So the issue becomes more than just, are we interested in her, are we attracted to her? The issue also becomes, are we likely to be rejected by her? And men and women both do an enormous amount of dysfunctional things to become attracted to the other sex. Men do a higher percentage of dysfunctional things, but women also do significantly dysfunctional things to make themselves attractive to men.
But we keep coming back around. I'm going to push a little harder, because I think as we go through these role issues, that we're no longer dealing with the family as much as men and women in the workplace, and the dynamics of those old-style relationships persist dramatically into new relationships, and yet who would quarrel with the notion of successful women in the workplace any more than successful men raising children? But there's still a dynamic going on, and that dynamic's powerful, and I don't think it's talked about very much, and I don't think we're, to be blunt, I don't think we're talking about it here.
Yes.
Are
you talking about the dynamic that involves sort of sexual overtones and stuff like that in the
Well, there's
workplace?
sexual overtones. There's also just that we haven't gotten rid of it, that we all carry it forth, in getting it out of the closet, as it were, of how people relate. Many of my honest-to-God best friends are women at this point in my life. I find women much more attractive generally to talk to, and more intellectually stimulating to talk to. And maybe there's a sexual overtone there. I won't deny it. But it's still, how do we do these relationships? It was easy when men were the only people in the power spots. It was sick, but it was easy. But it's much more pleasant to have the power balances equaling out. But there's still these overtones and these things that take place.
Yeah.
And do you think the overtones are bad? I mean, what's your uncomfortableness with it? I'm not saying they're good or bad, but
the uncomfortableness is that we're not having a particularly productive conversation. That it's that there are issues involved with male-female dynamics, and organizationally, there's a lot of blame going back and forth. If you're going to acknowledge that a lot of those reasons for power differentials had historic validity, which I think both you guys have articulated exceedingly well. But now let's bring those forward. Where are those dynamics in an integral business organization, an integral...
Okay.
I think does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, why don't you go ahead
and... Let me do a more in-depth answer to this question. In the old days, part of what we trained men to do is to understand that you are good on a team, and you are as long as you are the best in that spot. So you can enter the football team, but if you have more years of experience, and as a result of those years of experience and your seniority, you are less good a player than the new guy coming in, you're out. So all of male mentality was along the lines of, you're only as good as your productivity. That seniority, years of experience, things like that could actually work against you in something that was physical like football. So the whole society was basically set up to train men that we were replaceable parts, that we had a job to do, that as long as we did the job better than anybody else, that we could fight for representing ourselves as doing that job better. We could argue that. But if an immigrant came in and did that same job at half the price that we had, we knew our days were numbered. Now, when women came into the workplace, different dynamic. Women were the only immigrants to the workplace who had divided responsibilities. You go into a cab and you ask the cab driver, usually from a foreign country, how many hours almost always he, even though any woman can drive a cab, any adult woman can drive a cab, ask how many hours he works. What's your average number of hours? About 70 hours a week. 70 hours a week. Just try it out in a major city. Maybe not Denver, but I think Denver's pretty much a major city. In the center city, you get in the more center city, the more like you get to 70 hours. Okay, so the immigrant, the normal use of the word immigrant that came into the workplace was intensely involved in the workplace and basically a slave to the workplace to the degree to which he had to be to support his family effectively. When women came into the workplace, they did not have focused responsibilities like that immigrant. They had divided responsibilities. They had responsibilities at home and responsibilities over here. In fact, they were more likely to be in the workplace if they were divorced with children, single, and had divided responsibilities. And suddenly the government was saying to us, we had to promote in somewhat equal numbers the women with divided responsibilities as much as we had promoted, or even more so, than the immigrants with focused responsibilities. So there was a dynamic occurring between men's fear of the normal immigrant in the workplace, which went into the male psyche as, I'm going to be a replaceable part if I don't do more value, versus women coming into the workplace, which is, I'm going to be replaced if I'm a higher percentage of this group than women are. And so there was a type of fear that was settling in about women, toward women in the workplace, that did not happen for men, normally speaking. Now you put on top of that another layer, which was sort of the whole sexual dynamic of flirtation, then put on top of that the access dynamic. Most men would far prefer to talk to a woman than we would to talk to a man. So if an executive vice president is waiting for a salesperson out and sees outside that there's a salesperson that wants his attention, and that salesperson is a male, he starts saying, well, no, because he knows all the time that salesperson is going to gobble up. But he looks outside his office and he sees a beautiful and attractive female, suddenly he has a few minutes. And that few minutes triggers his protector instinct toward her to wanting to be a hero to make things happen for her that didn't happen for the female. Now, at the same time, the female may be feeling not very valued because she's looked at in a sexual way. She feels sort of vibrations of sexuality toward her. And the female then becomes upset at being somewhat devalued because she notices that more is going on than just the value of her product. So the female talks with HR people about uncomfortable feelings, and the HR people talk to the men about the female's uncomfortable feelings. And what happens is exactly what you said a minute ago, is that we have had in the last 20 years a monologue in the workplace of women expressing what was happening from their perspective, and men knowing that if they opened their mouths to express what was happening from their perspective, they would terminate their career advancement. And what needs to occur, I believe, in the workplace is a full hearing for women and a full hearing for men, and the workplace creating a safe environment for a genuine dialogue between the sexes, as opposed to sensitivity being interpreted as sensitivity only toward women or minorities and not sensitivity to everybody that works at that workplace.
And I think it's entirely appropriate, again, talking a little bit about labor, because in addition to looking at just being able to take different perspectives and reach some sort of equitable understanding, even before we take action, that there is also very real cases of power distribution. And what we have to look at very carefully is, can the power be redistributed in a way that actually is fair and that isn't merely trying to impose another value structure because we think that that's what we should be doing. Mm-hmm. And so part of what tends to happen at the beginning of any kind of civil rights movement, and certainly from the 60s to the present, is that it tends to just swing into play, and it often goes in extremes. It's just historically, this is just how humans operate. And maybe in an ideal world, we wouldn't want to see that happen. But it just, in the real messy world of human being interaction, this happens often. And so we went in and we basically said, okay, we're going to have all of this sensitivity. And since it's certainly in the typical 1950s scheme of corporate culture, for reasons very few of which were oppressive, but all these other factors that were in place, it was basically a white male world. And so, therefore, a certain dynamic gets set into play, which is that if you're not white and male, you're being discriminated against. And if you are white and male, it's your fault. And so that gets the game started. And under those circumstances, then people who didn't get a chance under the previous structure, both techno-economic mode and value structure, at least it breaks the topsoil open, it gets stuff moving, things get started. There's some unfairness that goes on, yes, of course. But you're trying to switch from an old mode where these roles are embedded into a new mode where they're going to first have to be loosened up, and then they'll settle until they're appropriate equilibrium at that stage. We don't know what that is at that point. One thing has become clear, though, that there are certain biological differences between male and female that aren't going away. And therefore, we can't simply say all differences between male and female are due to discrimination. And that was the extreme version that a lot of first-wave feminists did. They couldn't do otherwise. Again, this is not a blame game. But once we've put all of this stuff on the table, shaking the box up like crazy, so okay, now let's see where it starts settling. Then you get to what Warren is talking about, which is, okay, now we really have to go back and look at all of these different roles. What really is fair now, what really isn't fair. And not just previously, as you were saying, that the woman is allowed to express her uncomfortableness, and if the male does, that's the end of his career. We've got, okay, far enough, stop. We've gone just plenty far in that direction. Now we really have to come back to some sort of middle way that steers between these things.